Good morning to everyone listening. This is the MedTech and Device panel at the SACS Forum. And we're joined by, I'm Wilder Fulford, chairing the panel, and we're joined by, I'm seeing Andrew Glass from Vivasure, Beatriz Volckaert from Phillips Ventures, Lloyd from Pixium, Mike Karim from Vivasure, and Zyman from Cukierman and Company. And what I'm going to do is ask each of the participants to introduce themselves and their organization, and then we'll go into a discussion which will deal with a few topics. We had originally been planning a discussion that would largely be around the financing environment for MedTech. It seems that with the pandemic over, we are moving from to a different horseman of the apocalypse in the form of war. And so I will ask the panelists as the first topic to talk about the implications of the war in Ukraine for the medical supply and medical device industry. A small but important component of the overall picture. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to, I guess, do this in alphabetical order, and that would put Lloyd first. So Lloyd, you want to talk about yourself and Pixium, please?
Sure, thanks, Father. I'm Lloyd, the CEO of Pixium Vision. I've been the CEO here at Pixium since May of 2019. I have around 28 years of experience in the medical device world. Did a little stint in drug delivery, but mostly medical device. So I've seen sort of the ups and downs and goods and bads in medical device. Done quite a bit of work in the US and Europe and Asia, so also have a pretty broad geographical experience. Pixium Vision, we're a late clinical stage company. We've developed a brain-machine interface technology that really uses neurostimulation to restore vision in patients that have lost sight. So they were seeing before, and now they no longer have sight, considered legally blind. Our primary target population is the dry form of age-related macular degeneration, which today is the leading form of blindness amongst the aging, and there is no clinical therapy for these patients. The last thing maybe I'd state is, if you put it in perspective, about 160 million people worldwide suffer from dry AMD, and about 5% will live long enough to go on to become legally blind. And we know in many different clinical studies that this type of blindness actually leads to a tremendous negative impact on their quality of life. So we try to restore vision and give them back a certain quality of life. Thanks for having me on the panel.
Thank you. Andrew, you want to talk about yourself and Vivasure?
Yeah, thank you. So Andy Glass, I am the CEO of Beavishere Medical. It's a Galway-based medical device company that's been around over a decade. We are now on the verge of starting our US pivotal trial in the US. We have a novel, innovative technology to solve large hole percutaneous closure challenges. So as you guys may know, the largest medical device market in the world right now is the TAVR market, or transcatheter aortic valve replacement. And the largest complication of those procedures relates to the closure of the percutaneous axis in the leg. And so we have a very novel bioresorbable solution to solve that challenge. We also have a pipeline of products, including one closure device to solve challenges on the venous side as well. About myself, I joined Vivasure about 1.5 years ago. Previous to this, I spent 15 plus years at Abbott Laboratories in a variety of roles, commercial, marketing, business development. I've had stints in several parts in the US, in Shanghai, and now I live here in Europe, in London. So Pleasure to be on the panel and look forward to discussing these great topics we have today. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And Mike, Karim, I guess you're next in the alphabet.
Yes, hello everybody and good morning to the audience. Pleasure to be here. My name is Mike Karim. I'm the CEO of Oxford Endovascular. We're a medical device spin-out from Oxford University, and we're developing a technology, a modified flow diverter to treat brain aneurysms. We spun the company out of the university about 6 years ago, and we've raised about $20 million through 4 funding rounds. I've spent about 30 years in the medical device business, worked for companies like Boston Scientific, Hardware Incorporated, and a number of small developing companies, and had the great fortune to take devices to many parts of the world. Our technology is a flow diverter. Flow diverters treat brain aneurysms, and brain aneurysms are very common. They affect 1 in 50 people. And if a brain aneurysm ruptures, about 50% of the patients will die. And of the survivors, over 60% that survive will have permanent brain damage. So it's very important to treat this condition. Existing devices, about 35% of cases have problems with the devices being able to open or land in the right position. And this can lead to severe complications. So our technology uses origami engineering concepts to allow the device to place accurately, first time, every time, and open up very efficiently, overcoming the existing challenges with flow diverters. We're preclinical at this stage. We're heading towards a first-in-human clinical study. We've engaged with the FDA, who are very supportive of what we're doing, and also engaged with the MHRA. We're about a year away from starting our first-in-human. So look forward to speaking with everybody.
And Beatriz, you're next, I guess.
Perfect. So, well, hi to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Beatriz Volckaert, Senior Associate at Philips Ventures. It's the corporate venture capital arm of Philips, the multinational health tech company. So at Philips Ventures, we have mainly 3 types of investments. The first one is a regular digital health fund. The second one, we invest and also collaborate with the startup. And the third one, we directly invest on other venture capitals. So to give you a bit more detail on each type of investment, the first one, it's a digital health fund investing around 5 million in Series A, B, in digital health companies that have already commercial traction. We can lead investment, and we like to syndicate all the deals too. The second type of investment, we also invest on equity, but we require a collaboration with Philips. So in here, we are quite flexible, and we can write checks from 1 million up to 100 million. And to collaborate, we have 4 main businesses within Philips. So the first one is personal health. So it's mainly where the toothbrush, shavers, maternity and child products are. The second one is connected care. Is mainly technologies that tries to improve the healthcare management, remote patient monitoring, improving the communication or collecting data from wearables, for instance. The third business is precision diagnosis, is where the CT or the MRI stands. And the fourth one is image-guided therapy. So it's mainly minimally invasive treatments using using imaging in the cath lab. So in here, if we find a company that would collaborate with Philips, we can also invest on them. And the third type of investment, we mainly act as limited partners on other venture capitals. So, well, really nice to meet you all. I'm really looking forward for our discussion.
And thank you. Finally, Shai, I suppose you spent your entire life being the last guy to get called on. Shai Zyman, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I'm Shai Zyman, partner in Cukierman. Cukierman is an investment house the largest private investment house in Israel and one of the largest in Europe. We're Israeli-Swiss. And we have two vehicles of, actually three, of investments. Among them, Catalyst as a private equity funds. We have Catalyst 4 right now. Each fund is about 250 million. We are launching crowdfunding, and we have family office in activity. But the largest activity is investment banking that we do for Israeli and European companies, about 50% and 50%, reaching towards the 10 billion this year after a high record year last year. And then within the investment banking, the highest volume, we are agnostic, so we treat with all kinds of technologies, but the life sciences is about 40 to 50% out of our activity. And I must say, especially recently, because there is a big incline that we are facing during the last year. And nice to meet you all. A bit, maybe 2 words about myself, because I forgot that. I've been a CEO of several startup companies. Myself, 15 years in the MedTech. And last position, I was also a client of Cukierman and then decided to join in as a partner. So that's in short about myself. Spending my time between Israel and Switzerland all the time.
And maybe I should introduce myself as well. I'm Wilder Fulford. I'm the founder of the Fulford Group, which is a small transaction advisory investment bank serving mainly the life sciences industry, biopharma and MedTech. We split our time between. I founded the firm 5 years ago. For 5 years before that, I set up and helped run the London office for Terea Partners, which is another advisory boutique. And then my career before that was spent as a partner at several large investment banks, Deutsche Bank, Merrill Lynch, Salomon Brothers in London, and before that in New York, doing primarily mergers and acquisitions, primarily in healthcare, although I have a varied sort of career. I did spend a few years as a venture capitalist, and many years ago did a PhD in molecular biology for my sins, which makes me, 30 years later, semi-literate in science matters. But as the Fulford Group, we mostly do M&A and complex partnering deals for biopharma and medtech companies, and occasionally do private financing, private placements, usually in the context of a broader strategic arrangement. At the moment, we're raising money for a very interesting company that's hoping to transform the blood storage industry, which is a pretty sleepy industry, but huge, Hemonext. And we have worked for many years with a company in Scandinavia that has a fascinating solution for, an improvement in the treatment of patients with ileostomies. And always on the lookout for new, interesting companies to talk to. So look, with that, I thought it would be worth spending a few minutes this morning if anyone on the panel has any perspectives on the implications for the healthcare, and especially the medtech industry, of the current crisis in the Ukraine and the war that Russia has started there. Obviously, sadly, the field of war is a big customer for large parts of medical supply, medical industry. Many companies and industries are joining in the boycotts of Russia. The world economy is being affected in ways that are still shaking out. But I'd be interested if anyone has a perspective, ways that your own organizations are reacting to the crisis, your own thoughts. So,
Maybe just a couple of thoughts that I bring forward. I think one is on maybe the ethical side. So the way that we have a tendency to look at these things, and we're not a commercial company yet, we will be in about 18 months as we finish our final pivotal work. But, you know, physicians take an oath. We as company managers don't, but our customers take an oath that they have to help people and treat people. And, you know, we have a practical perspective on this. You know, when somebody commits a crime and the police actually shoot them and they are now brought to the hospital and have to undergo surgery, the surgeon does not have the liberty to say, this is an accused murderer, I won't treat them. They have an ethical obligation to do so. And I think we as companies in this space also have an ethical obligation to sort of go above the political situation. As much as Russia might be at fault for what they're doing, you know, I won't comment on that in this forum, but I do think that if people need care, regardless of what the government policy is in the country in which they find themselves. So that's just maybe one comment I'll make. The other comment I would make is maybe from more of a practical operational side. You know, we're not heavily dependent on materials or human capital from Russia or the Ukraine, but we have companies that we work with, especially in the software industry and the programming industry, that do have connections, strong connections to the Ukraine in particular. And I think, you know, this war, of course, is going to cause further disruption. If you look at the COVID pandemic as well, you know, supply chain disruption is one thing, but then the human capital disruption, I think, is another that we have to take into serious consideration. I don't know what you do about that. I guess you expatriate people that you're dependent on, you know, to help drive your technology forward. So maybe just another viewpoint as well, something to consider.
Yeah, also maybe from an industry perspective, as Philips, of course, we are continuing to support customers, patients, and colleagues in both Ukraine and Russia as best as we can. And at the end, our focus is to improve people's health and well-being. And we are not a political organization, but of course, like at the core, we have this deep respect for human rights, freedom, and equality. So, well, for now, the immediate priorities for healthcare and supporting everyone in this difficult situation.
I believe the biggest influence in here is the defocus from the COVID that this war, the first one in this millennium, is creating in here. It's actually the first big war in that millennium that is driving away the. I remember I initiated the COVID Innovation Summit in April 2020. Nobody could talk about any other subject, and it's gradually went down, and right now I think this is actually shifting away the focus that can be in financing and commercial deals and so on from only or mainly COVID-related technologies and financing. I think it's still not clear if the focus is driving toward emergency technologies like wearable patch sensors or HEMA-related technologies, auto-injectors, things like that, that might be relevant for war or not, because we have no idea if that's going to end in the next few days or going to be around for the next few years. But I think currently the main implications to this panel and to the viewers is the shift of focus, as far as I see.
Thank you. That's interesting. Certainly, my first question for this panel had been, you know, the end of COVID, and my first question instead is the war. COVID is probably still a bigger global issue in terms of the actual number of people that are affected, but it's hard to take your eye off current events. It's the first major war of aggression by a major power in some cases any of our lifetimes, certainly in the last few decades. Anyway, Andrew or Mike, anything to add to that? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I appreciate the comments of everybody, and I think the key point of putting this on the agenda at the beginning is to highlight what everyone is seeing, and of course our hearts go out to all these innocent people who are being displaced and suffering. I do agree with Lloyd and Beatriz. I think in the medical supplies industry we're in a particularly unique situation. Our focus is on helping and saving lives. We're not an arms manufacturer, although this can sometimes cross over if you're talking about other forms of technology like wearables and so on. So our company, we're preclinical, we're not supplying anything at this stage. However, I think one has to be very, very careful, when you look at these sorts of issues, because if you go down a road of stopping supply of medical technologies to general populations that don't, necessarily represent what their governments are doing, it's a very dangerous route. And one could start to become selective about lots of governments around the world who have invaded other countries over time, even in recent years. That don't necessarily represent what their populations agree with. So, I think we are separate from that. And as long as we're not supporting military intervention, I think our situation is distinctly different. And we just have to remain above that. We have to be ethical and, continue to focus on helping and saving, the mass innocent populations, wherever that is.
I don't have much more to add to all the great comments. My only couple thoughts would be, one, we do have employees who are of Eastern European origin, and obviously they are more concerned. And so they're our top priority right now, making sure that they and their families are safe. And so, there's a greater question about not just will this be limited to, say, the Ukraine, but other countries in the region who were a part of former Soviet bloc countries, and what the implications would be. One trend that we have seen of late is probably because of COVID. We had seen more and more clinical trials being done in Eastern Europe. Georgia had been a very hot area for doing clinical trials, not so much the Ukraine, but we had done or seen people do clinical work in places like Latvia or Lithuania. And, will this uncertainty lead to people trying to find some other places? But, previous to COVID, a lot of first in mans had been moved from Europe to, say, South America. And then, COVID made that almost impossible. So a lot of European medical device companies who gone to Eastern Europe, I don't know if that'll still be the case going forward. But yeah, look, we'll have to see. This is all happening very fast for everybody. I think as a follow-on to what was said about, we thought COVID was on the way out. As you know, here in the UK, things have been liberated and we're now back to normal, if you will. But now the uncertainty is coming from a different direction. I think that's what's frustrating for us in this space, is it just adds more uncertainty to the markets and the dynamics that we have to work through. And it's secondary to the plight of the people who are undergoing the conflict, but it's something that we're going to have to deal with in the medical device sector here in Europe.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for those thoughtful comments. I mean, certainly I'm inclined to agree that companies providing materials that are essentially human health, to the extent they can, should rise above the fray and be even-handed. Hopefully that's what we'll see, and hopefully the need will not be as acute as the headlines make one fear at this time. The other topic, which these have sort of interlaced, that I was going to ask people to comment on was, as we appear to be exiting, I mean, rightly or wrongly, people are declaring an end or acting as if there's an end to the pandemic and we are moving into a post-COVID era. I'm wondering if you have any comments on what that means as a practical matter in terms of your own operations, or how you're thinking about your focus of business in terms of investments or fundraising. And of course, it's all because of topic number one, it's all a little bit chaotic at the moment. I see that the listed Russian stocks are down by 65% today, that's a bad day on the markets. The ruble's down by 30%. So again, who knows what it all means, and maybe not that much, but instability and uncertainty are never a friend to financing activities, especially for long-term high-risk startups. It's hard to think about the long-term when you don't know what's going to happen on Tuesday. So, but anyway, with that, how have you been thinking about the post-COVID environment, and assuming that things stabilize, how do you think it's going to turn out? Maybe reversing the alphabet. Shai, I'll look over to you, see if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, thank you. So, I think I'm not sure we are post-COVID, first of all. So let's presume and hope we are post-COVID. But we've seen a very interesting changes started from Q2 2020, when, as for example, we lost 3 large deals in that quarter. We had very high difficulties in finance or to reach additional finance for our funds during 2020. And so it was a very challenging environment. Nobody can travel, and that was also a big challenge. And then in 2020, we saw sort of a change because people were adapting. Capital investment was increasing, mainly in the life science arena. And today, I think that, there's freedom to travel, which makes, especially with MedTech, when you need the training, you need the evaluations of practitioners to do on the devices and things like that. That was really, it seems like stupid, but no practitioner could travel to China and even to Europe in some stages, and just to evaluate some kind of a device before you decide if to invest or not. That's a practical manner, but it couldn't be done for such a long period of time. And now these things are gradually diffusing. And in some, we saw in some industries that was heavily damaged. I'll give the extreme case, what was the medical aesthetics MedTech, that was boom, 2020 dead, 0, and then 21, a makeup period, booming like never before, and now back into normality. So it's a roller coaster that was we were having in the last 2 years, and it seems like stabilizing recently. One more aspect that was really I think affecting the early and mid-stage medtech startups is the capital markets growth. Right now, there's instability in the capital markets, so I believe the venture capital, the private placements will be stronger during 22. That's my own belief, and I think that was also an implications of the COVID. And last is, and that will be interesting to see, what will be the next trend from now on. Means it will be, and for surely remote diagnostic and procedures will be continue to grow, because the COVID just mainly did a shift in behavior, because I think most of the technologies were there much before, but right now, legitimate, I can tell about myself and my family in the last 2 years. I don't know if most of us didn't see the doctor even once, but we had a lot of digital video conferencing and telemedicine sensors. We have a package of a company called the Title, and I just privately invested as an angel in another company called Omnisense that have very high usability remote sensors, just because the trend is going towards that. And I think the big change that the COVID did is change patient behavior in that aspect, not only patient, payer, HMOs behaviors, and so on. So these are the main, I would say, trends that I see that are coming up. But on top of that, I think there's a lot of money coming into the life science and medtech industry just because governments are putting more money into it. The labs have a lot of money after these 2 years. Some of the pharma companies have a lot of money after, and this is gradually flowing into the venture capital, the private equities, and finally into the startup companies that will have a lot of capital in hand. That's my guess. And that's it from my end.
Wilder, sorry, can I just maybe make one comment on the backside of what Shai said? So interestingly, I can talk a little bit about financing and during COVID and post-COVID. I mean, I run a publicly traded company in France with a very small market cap. So we've had to get very creative, and we've been successful in raising money in the ups and downs. But your comment about people changing the way that they access care, which has been for some time, I think was accelerated. And I'll give you the perfect example. I mean, as I said, we target dry AMD. So our patient population is average onset of blindness in this population, 75. So we're treating patients between the ages of 75 and 82. And when I first started in 2019, there was a general thought that is a technology averse patient population. Those people want to go to clinic. Those people want to be seen professionally by doctors. And, we go through a rehabilitation program post-implantation of the patients where they have to learn to use their prosthetic vision, the world we create for them. And unbelievably, they're able to do so. But more importantly, we implemented a remote rehabilitation module by where the patient can at home undergo their therapy and be assisted remotely from a low vision specialist in clinic. And it's amazing how the general population and that age group is really begun to embrace these type of technologies. So, gone are the days to say grandma and grandpa, they don't know how to use their iPhone or turn on their computer. It's amazing how astute they've become. And I think COVID has really driven that behavior. So that's one thing. The second thing, though, on the financing side, I would say is, during the COVID world, of course, being a public company, issuing equity and having investments come through the equity route is something that we've done both in the private placement arena and publicly in secondary follow-ons. But this summer in particular, for the first time, we brought US institutional investors into the French share capital in a private placement. And I think it's quite honestly because these investors had made so much money last year, and the valuations in the US were so outrageous. In Europe, we had a slight uptick in valuation in the public markets, but nowhere near what they did in the US. And so as many years ago, US investors were beginning to invest in European companies because of the more reasonable valuations, we also took advantage of that. This past summer, we took 10 million into our share capital, primarily from US investors. I have to say that I agree also with Shai that the equity investment world is going to be a lot more difficult now. I think the Ukrainian-Russian issue is not helping matters. The uncertainty is something markets don't like. And so we're sort of watching and waiting to see, if there'll still be a window of opportunity there for equity investments. So.
Thank you for that. Look, I think that I tend to be skeptical about major changes in human behavior generally, but I think that the COVID has driven us to a world where, look at us all today, this morning, where, remote communication has become, not a complete substitute for human interaction, but more acceptable. One of the very first investments I ever made when I was a venture capitalist 30 or 40 years ago was in a teleradiology company when moving large packets of data around was not a cheap or easy thing to do. it's still not, completely taking over, but I think finally this COVID has kind of compressed 20 years of technological innovation into 2 in terms of driving that. I personally, that'll be a major trend that will take a while to shake out and will probably take unexpected forms. But anyway, Andrew, Mike, Beatriz, anything to add to this topic?
Well, yeah, I guess a couple of thoughts. Those are all very good. I think with respect to COVID, as it's dying down, I think we're running a lot of clinical trials, and that had been a real challenge for us during the peak of the pandemic. Is getting a lot better. So now we're able to, for example, start clinical trials in the U.S. Much more easily. And it's been a bit up and down here and there. We were, for example, we have a lot of clinical work in Germany, which seems to go through spikes here and there to get going. So clinical trials have been unpredictable, but we're seeing a bit of the light at the end of the tunnel here, and we're able to enroll more consistently and effectively. In terms of the fundraising, I would agree with a lot of the comments. I mean, to be honest, over the last year and a half, if you put digital in the name of your company, you probably would get money. I mean, we would have a lot of conversations about funding, and there was a huge push towards, this shift, seismic shift towards more digital treatment paradigms and approaches throughout the world. But I also think to the other comment about finding U.S. investors has become more international, in part because of the dynamics. So we had several term sheets from China, despite the fact that we've never met the people in person over the past year or so. China remains a very hot market, I think, for medical devices, and that is feeding in. But to the other comment, I do see a lot of storm clouds ahead in the sense that the market uncertainty is starting to feed down. I think there's been a bit of a binge for a lot of investors over the past year or so, and there's a bit more skepticism going forward that's going to happen in the US, in Asia, and I think even here in Europe, you're starting to see a bit of the investors to pull back a bit with the just kind of general global come down from that high over the last 2 years. So I think that's something that we're all going to have to face as small companies in terms of raising money. So those are a few additional comments.
Beatriz or Mike, anything to add to those ideas?
Well, from my side, totally agree on all the comments that everyone was making. Like, of course, like the main impact of COVID-19 on the MedTech industry, let's say, it's been on the clinical trial side, as some companies were saying, and it's been quite difficult to recruit, and the trials have been quite inconsistent. So, of course, like we expect new technologies supporting the clinical trial space, and we expect growth in that area, technologies that help to do this virtual support during procedures and that can improve connectivity. So we are taking into consideration all the health economics when investing in new medical devices, and how to improve the patient outcomes and how to do it more efficiently. And in terms of more the financing environment, in Europe, we are lacking more late stage capital compared to the capital available in the US. But well, Europe is doing a very good job in providing and matching all these investment with non-dilutive funding, and while these resource constraints push European deals to be more capital efficient on the innovation and implementation of new technologies. So, well, this will be my thought.
Thank you.
And I would echo the comments of Shai earlier. I'm not sure. Every country has seen the end of the pandemic. Obviously in the UK, restrictions have lifted and so on. But from a medical device company, we're heavily reliant on a global supply chain to produce thousands and thousands of samples for tests, etc. What we are seeing is because of social distancing throughout the supply chain, and indeed illness continuing in many situations, the capacity to produce component parts, and this is probably about 10 companies that we see, has reduced about 50%. And then you add in the effect of companies pivoting away from clinical trials to doing more R&D, there's been an increase in the demand for these. So there's kind of a double effect going on. So, we're obviously hopeful that that will improve, but the jury is still out. We're yet to see that change take effect. But hopefully we will in time see that. And I think one of the things we have to bear in mind is that there are many people in the world who just haven't, even had a first vaccination. It's very easy to, look at ourselves, who have been double, triple vaccinated, etc. But then I go back to the thoughts of healthcare professionals who reiterated, we're not safe until we're all safe. So I think there's an onus on our industry to, create pressure to make sure that everybody is vaccinated. On a positive note, I would say that I think, Wilder, as you highlighted, the pandemic has forced positive change in terms of utilizing technology to shrink the world and allow us to communicate more effectively through these types of platforms. And our last raise that we carried out in 2021, we managed to do this through the pandemic. We brought in a new lead investor. All of our meetings were done virtually. I remember on several occasions I was attending 3 different fundraising conferences at the same time in several different time zones. So that just would not have been possible. So, I think there are some excellent takeaways moving forwards. Adding to that, I think there's been an increased interest in health tech from investors that may, not have even looked at the space. And of course, all of that has to be balanced against other global issues that we are facing, which are slowing down, capital movements and so on. So, yeah.
Well, that's a good segue. I mean, maybe we should talk a little bit about fundraising for MedTech generally. I mean, my experience trying to raise money in the category for the last few years is that the number of venture capital firms that say in their websites that they invest in MedTech exceeds the number that do by about a factor of 10. But there are some that do, and maybe some that are doing it more. Maybe the movement is in that direction. I mean, I think there's a lot of fascinating trends in the market we could talk about. For example, the very large pent-up demand that's probably out there for a lot of treatments based on the underdiagnosis of cancer, many things, any elective procedures. So maybe there'll be a big burst of demand, who knows? But I guess the question is, where are the pockets of money? Who is going to be successful in raising money? What should companies be thinking about who wish to raise money? Either those of us who advise companies to raise money, those of us, Beatriz, I guess you're the only one who's actually sitting on a bag of money that you can hand out, and then Lloyd, Andrew, Mike, who at in various ways in different stages have raised money recently. Let's talk about that for a while. And maybe I'll start with Lloyd.
Yeah, it's something that preoccupies, I guess, 80% of my time. I can tell you that, let me start with the positive, I think. What we really saw, which was a bit unprecedented, now I'm going to take us back over the last 24 months, was a rotation of generalist funds into the MedTech market. And I think that goes, Wilder, on to your comment about there are more so-called MedTech investors that call themselves MedTech investors than actually do. And so there was a pocket of opportunity. And so what we saw was a lot of generalist investors who unfortunately maybe don't understand the complete nuances of investing in medical device companies and what that entails, that had a pocket of money. They came in, they rotated in, and they invested quite heavily in the healthcare sector. That was positive. And I think they filled a gap in the market from what would be traditional life science investors who sort of rotated out of MedTech and more into biotech, drug delivery, therapies, diagnostics. So So that was good. However, now I think what's happening is we're now starting to see a rotation, and we did already at the end of last year into early this year, of the generalist funds out of life science. They invested at huge valuations in extremely early stage companies that unfortunately, because of COVID, have had long delays, expensive delays in their clinical trial programs and other things. And so they've gotten a bit of a bad taste, I think, in their mouth moving forward, which may close a bit of the door for access to these types of investors. So that's the first point I would say of consideration. The second point is, because of the virtual world now that we find ourselves in, it's become, I think, more difficult for investors to gauge management teams, to get the real sense of, is this the real deal? The technology is promising, but are they overselling? And so what I found has been successful and helpful in Pixium being able to raise money in spite of the complexity of the technology and where we are in our stages, to surround ourselves with advisors that are highly credible. And what I mean by advisors, I mean law firms, banks, people that participate in the raising of the money, that have a certain level of validation, because that is sort of an indirect way for the investor to diligence you without being able to physically spend a lot of time with you physically in the diligence process. So that is sort of a word of advice that I would give, is don't underestimate the importance of the advisors you surround yourself with in the fundraising aspect. And then the last point I would mention is, more than ever, you need to be really clear about your milestones, and then show historically where you've been able to promise, you've committed, you've hit the milestone, because that track record is what investors will invest in, and that you're completely open with the fact that, you know what, your data readout is now 9 months delayed because you couldn't finish recruiting patients because of COVID. You need to say it because everybody knows it. And if you don't say it, then they start to question your integrity. So integrity also, and clear milestone communication, and showing how you've hit those milestones in the past, I think is more crucial now than ever.
That's a great point. I've made that point to my clients constantly. Just have a clear business plan, but have a historical record of having met your plan, and be transparent. And speaking as an advisor, I agree with you completely. You should have a professional advisor to help you. Andrew, you've been raising money in the markets as an early stage company. How's it been going?
Yeah, well, I would say that those are the great comments by Wilfred there. I would add a couple of ideas for people to think about. One is, you got to understand the type of investors that would be interested in your technology, and the stage and the potential return, right? So we had a lot of conversations with some of those, as you were described, as new investors to MedTech, and they're looking for, is this going to be a $5 billion business in a couple of years? And you're like, man, no, that's not going to happen. They would just kind of turn it off. And you're like, well, what else are you looking at that's going to be like that? Because there aren't that many, but they had this idea because they've talked to so many of these kind of digital platforms, and had seen some of these other examples of what type of returns they're going to have. And so we found it interesting that, as we went around for different investors around the world, that there was, a bit of expectation setting that you had to set. And what they're looking for was quite different than what you had to offer. And so that, I mentioned before, we got several term sheets from Asia, and, we were right up the alley there. I mean, it was kind of an epiphany where we would have so many difficult conversations with investors in the U.S., and then we would call these folks in Asia, and boy, it was like night and day. We were suddenly their best friends. So I think understanding where your technology is and where it fits in different investors' wheelhouses would be quite interesting. The challenge we have as European MedTech, unfortunately, is the introduction of MDR, and that it makes the timelines longer, the regulatory burden harder. And as such, the old dynamics, as you mentioned, Wilder, about there's quick approvals have changed for a lot of people, and so we've got that back. So the experienced MedTech investors, I think, are kind of starting to say, hey, this is not as interesting as we wanted it to be. So you're finding it more challenging, particularly here in some of the I would say, local VCs or historically European VCs who would invest in MedTech, and even US ones as well. So, what we found was winners for us were obviously going to Asia, and then also dealing with strategics. So Beatriz could probably speak to this, but the strategics have kind of a longer term view, like different bolt-on technologies or looking to build a portfolio and need growth. So, that was a story that's worked for them. And in retrospect, I wish we had started some of those things earlier instead of banging our head against the wall in other places. But I think that's my advice would be, look, start to think and understand really quickly, and this is where the advisors can help you, of where your technology would fit quickly, and then go after those people, because you only have so much time, effort, and energy. And as was mentioned, you don't have that personal connection right now. So you're going to be doing all these Zoom calls, and you're going to be doing a lot of really, I would say, introductions via video. And if you're not at the wheelhouse of the investors to start with, well, it's going to be a really long road to raise money.
And look, that's advice I give constantly. People rarely invest in stuff the very first time they hear about it. So if you have in mind to have a strategic partnership with Boston Scientific, Medtronic, whoever, 3 years from now, a good time to meet them would be right now today. Before you need them, let them germinate, let it percolate through. Beatriz, I mean, you're the only representative here from exactly that kind of company, and big bags of corporate finance, or corporation finance. What are your thoughts on the environment?
Yeah, so from my perspective, of course, we're in touch with companies on an early stage, and it depends a lot on the type of technologies, but focus on the medical devices. Of course, like we are trying to partner with these companies as early as possible, as the valuations are increasing a lot, right? So before reaching the market, we are trying to co-develop together, or to, I don't know, like to have some kind of synergies with some product that we have already on the pipeline as Philips. So this will be one thought. Another curious thing, maybe, it's that, well, as the inflating valuation in both MedTech and digital health is so high, investors are going towards more early stage companies, or more seed, Series D, and we've seen large funding rounds in later stage medical devices, but most companies have raised little capital. So, well, I think that we are now missing a gap in a later stage funding, despite we're very active in, for example, in Europe, in syndicating deals both in equity and debt. And well, another thought, just to complement also the thoughts of you, we're also seeing a lot of more activity from US and Asian investors in Europe. So they are spending more time in European deals. So, well, it seems that we have nice perspective for the following years.
Any further? Thank you, Beatriz. That was very helpful. Mike or Shai, anything to add to that? We're down to our last 4 minutes, but I think staying focused on financing environment is probably the best place to focus.
Yeah, sure. Well, now I'd echo your comments a few minutes ago of, it's a long game when you're seeking funding. And, one of the things I noticed was that going back to groups that we'd built relationships with over the last 4 or 5 years, they really appreciated being able to get an update on, what we were doing. And out of that, one group came forward and said, we're very happy to lead. We like the progress that you've made. We've been, watching you and, building the relationships. And I think that's something that, all organizations need to do, looking forwards. I think there has been increased interest from other areas coming earlier. For example, China, that was mentioned. I think various Chinese companies are now more interested in licensing deals earlier on, which potentially may lead to exits pre-FDA approval. So, whether that affects US strategics, I'm not sure. One of the things we've had to be very conscious of is the regulatory situation in Europe versus the US. And, we made a decision to have a very clear strategy of going to the US for our pivotal studies, and the investors appreciate that. So, you know, the jury is out on Europe right now, and for a small company, investing your resources wisely is absolutely key, and not putting them at risk. So, yeah.
And Shai, you're out raising money for companies. Where do you see as the best sources now?
Yeah, so maybe I'll mix in my answer the two topics that we put, and we have only 2.5 minutes to address that, including the exit strategy of the companies. So I think we saw two main trends recently, and I think it's related to the valuation that Beatriz just mentioned. The valuations is sky high. It's sort of a hype. There's a lot of shareholders that feel, okay, this is a hype, this is the time to sell. And while we were usually advising to 80% of the companies to do private placements, that was the case, and 20% were M&As. Right now it's about 50-50. So we have much more requests for M&A, competitive bidding, or any kind of trade sale projects that we are having right now. So that's one of the trends. And I don't know for how long it will last, but currently I see that there's a very clear trend. On the other hand, we saw a lot of money coming also from generalist or agnostic sources like general funds, family office, and general VCs that, you know, because of the life science focus right now, allocated more money towards that. And as a result, we saw several quite massive amount of the rounds that we were closing were oversubscribed, and that gives a very big advantage for the companies because they can really negotiate their own terms when there's oversubscription to a round. We saw also a big several cases of rounds growing up during the round itself. I mean, it started in 15 million, finishing in 25 or 30. We saw several of these. So
Shai, we're down to 25 seconds. So maybe just quickly, thank you, and sorry to interrupt. Beatriz, Andrew, Lloyd, Mike, Shai, thank you for this interesting discussion. There's obviously at least another hour of stuff we could be talking about, but we only have 9 seconds. So thank you all for that, and hopefully we'll be in touch for other reasons. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.